Welcome to Wednesday night Bible study. And we're in the book of Revelation, chapter 21. We did not get all the way through it last week, so we're going to complete that this week. And I'm just going to do a quick review, and then we'll keep on trucking, all right? Chapter 21 of Revelation. Remember, we talked about, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. This is John talking. And he's seeing these visions that God is letting him see because he wants him to see it all and get it wrote down. He said, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I found, when I was going back over this again, Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, if you're keeping notes, this is where Jesus said this, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or the stroke shall pass away from the law until it is accomplished. We're there at the book of Revelation. We're ready. The heaven and earth are about to pass away. So when that happens, God says, okay, we don't need the law anymore, but we need the law. It's perfect. It's true. When we get to that point, we're not going to need it anymore. What did Jesus say the law was? I know I'm getting off Revelation a little bit, but what is the law? What does the Bible teach us the law was for? It was a tutor. Remember that? Schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. It was to show us where we were. It was like a signpost to say, this is where we want to be, but we're nowhere near that. It was a schoolmaster. It was a tutor to show us what we didn't know. You know what I'm saying? Isn't it terrible when you think you know and you walk in to do a test and you open up the test and you go, oh my stars, I don't know any of this stuff. All right? That's kind of what the law was. The law was us humans thought we had it all together, and then we realized we're not even close to where we're supposed to be. So it says in the end, it says the first heaven and the first earth are passed away. And I kind of touched on the fact that this is the first heaven and first earth because there is a teaching out there that says there was a heaven and an earth before this one. But the Bible contradicts that. Also says there's no longer any sea. And we talked about there are some teachers that say there's no more sea, and there may not be. In fact, if you look at the book of Genesis, there's an argument that there might not have been a sea then. All the ground was watered from springs underneath. And when the flood came, the ground was broke up and all the water gushed forth, and then God had to do something with it. Well, maybe he's going to put the earth back the same way so that all the groundwater's underneath and it's just flowing and it waters. Probably not going to rain, not going to have storms in the new heaven and the new earth. All right? Going to go back the way it was. So there's an argument for that, and I'm not saying it's not true. Could be. But sea typically in the Old Testament either means chaos or turmoil. In fact, the Jewish people said that a lot. It's like the sea, because the sea was always waves and turmoil. Sea was also the pagan nations, when it talked about the pagan nations sea. Well, there's not going to be any of that. There's not going to be any turmoil. There's not going to be any pagan nations. And probably not going to be any rain, so you can pick any one of them you want, and it still fits, okay? Not going to argue with you about either one of them. When we get to heaven, if you still want to know, you can go say, what's that mean, no sea? All right? But as we go through these last two chapters, you'll find out that when we get to heaven, we're on a new heavens and new earth in this new Jerusalem, so we can probably just look around ourselves and tell, okay? Verse 2, it says, I saw a holy city, a new Jerusalem coming down from heaven, and God made ready as a bride adorned for her husband, so it was beautiful, in other words. Verse 3, it says, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle or the dwelling place of God is among men. He's going to be with us. He's going to dwell among them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be among them. Somewhere in here we're going to read where it says we're going to see him face to face. Remember where it says we can't see God face to face and live? We will then. We're going to have glorified bodies. We'll be able to. We're going to live with him. We'll be able to walk and talk with him just like Adam and Eve did in the cool of the day. Verse 4 says he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death, no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. I got some texts in phone calls about this. Because if we go to Isaiah chapter 65, verse 17, write that down. We're not going there today. We did it last time. That's where it says the old things won't even be remembered. And so when we get to heaven, will we know everybody? Yes, we'll know and be known the way we're known. But I'm not going to know my wife as my wife. I'm going to know my wife as Linda. There's not going to be marriage relationships there. So I got a few text messages and phone calls that said, what? What are you talking about? All right, but it just says the old things won't be remembered. We're not going to remember the hurt that we go through or the pain that we had. We're gonna know people, probably know people that we didn't even realize we should know. Does that make sense? But it's not going to be anything like we think it will be. It's going to be an awesome place. So you can go back to Isaiah 65:17 and read that.
There will be no scars. The only scars will be on Jesus.
Only scars. Other thing is, there's something else that's talked about. When we get to heaven, how old do you think we're going to be? Herb, you think you're still going to have the pain you got now? No. There's a debate. The Bible does not tell us how old we'll be in heaven. So babies that died as babies, are they still babies in heaven? My grandfather and grandmother were what, 86 and 87? Are they still 86 and 87? My grandmother was in a wheelchair. No, they're not. So how old are they?
It's irrelevant at that point.
It's irrelevant, but most people say they're going to be 30 years old. Now, if you're 60 and you're going to be 30, you're like, yes. But if you're 16 and you're going to be 30, you're like, what happened? That's a ripoff. Okay? Some people think, well, if a child goes to heaven, when we get there, we're going to be able to see them grow up to 30 and then they stop. The Bible doesn't tell us. It's all speculation. The reason they pick 30 is, in biblical times, you had to be 30 to start your ministry. You had to be 30 to be considered a grown-up. Jesus started his ministry at 30. King David became king at 30. King Saul became king at 30. So many 30s. Does it matter? No. It's just something to think about, okay? The Bible doesn't tell us, so anybody picks an age, they're just guessing anyway, all right? And when we get to heaven, we're not even going to remember this conversation probably. We'll be so enamored with everything else that's going on, so you won't even remember to ask. Verse 5, it says, and he sits on the throne, said, behold, I am making all things new, and said, write these words are faithful and true. There's another reference to God's words. He said, write these words, they are faithful and true. God's words are always faithful and true. And he's the one that's in control, and he's going to make all things new. Verse 6, he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. What is Alpha and Omega? Anybody know?
Beginning and end.
Yeah, those are actually alphabetical words. Say it again. In the Greek, it's a Greek alphabet, the first and the last. So he's saying, I'm the first and the last, I'm the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from among the springs of living water, or the water of life. If you go to Isaiah chapter 65 again, in fact, that Isaiah chapter 65, I went back and read it this week. It is just encouraging and uplifting and satisfying. It talks all about heaven. It talks all about this new heaven and new earth. And I don't want to throw a bomb on there, but when it's talking about new heavens and new earth, we talked a little bit last time. In fact, we talked a lot last time about the first heaven, the second heaven, and the third heaven. Remember, Paul talked about going to the third heaven. That's where God was. Does God have to dwell in the third heaven? No. There is no such thing as third heaven to God. He created it for a purpose, so Paul could meet him there, or that's where the angels have their war, all that. But God is everywhere. He created everything that's there. He could make it all new, or he could be creating a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the atmosphere, the second heaven is the outer space. So maybe we're going to have a new outer space and a new atmosphere and a new earth, but maybe the third heaven's staying the same. It doesn't tell us for sure what's going on here. One of the problems we got with that is if the people that are his people, if he creates a new earth and a new heaven, where are we going in the meantime? Because at the white throne judgment, the old earth and the old heavens had to flee away, so they're gone. Then there's a white throne judgment, then there's a new heaven and new earth. So what are we doing? Just like floating around like spacemen in the meantime? We have glorified bodies, we could do whatever we want. It's just something to think about. I don't have the answer, and it doesn't really make a lot of difference. God's going to have a place for us. People are with him in paradise right now because we heard him tell a guy that. Today you'll be with me in paradise. Wherever that is, whatever that looks like. All right? So which heaven is getting the makeover? We don't really know. At least two, the first and the second. Don't know about the third. Isaiah 65 verse 1 actually talks about those living waters. I think I put a mark there. Maybe I'll just read one of those. Is it 65 or 60? It is 65. Now I'm slowing us down, ain't I? 65. Nope, not that one either. I got a bad note, maybe. Oh, it's a guy who needs glasses. It's 5:5. Now I have to find it. So 5:5. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 1, it says, "Oh, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why do you spend your money on what is not bread, what is not real food, and your wages on what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good and delight yourself in abundance. Incline your ear and come to me." Listen, this whole chapter goes on and says if you want to be satisfied, you got to chase after Jesus, not this world. Remember when Jesus said to his disciples, "I got manna you don't know about." And they said, "You didn't eat lunch. We went to get lunch. We come back, you're talking to this woman, and you didn't eat. How can you not be hungry?" He said, "I got food you don't even know about." So it talks all about being satisfied. Verse 7, it says, "He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son." That word son right there doesn't literally mean a male boy. It means he will be my heir. He will be my heir. So many times you read that and all the girls go, "Oh, I got left out." No, it's not talking about that. All right? He will be my child, my heir. Not a servant, not somebody that works here. I will be his God and he will be my heir. But for the cowardly, now it's going to go back. And remember, John is seeing this vision. He's getting this teaching. John has seen all this. And chronologically, what's going on right now takes place after the 1,000-year reign, after the white throne judgment. But how long did it take John to get this vision and get it wrote down? A month? A year? I don't know. Didn't take 1,000 years. He didn't live that long. He's in his 90s. In fact, God was probably in a hurry. The guy's in his 90s said, "I got to hurry up and get this guy to write this down." Never know, okay? So God's backing up a little bit to remind John, put this in there so the people that read this know and remember that there are people who are not going to get in on this. It says in verse 8, "But for the cowardly, the fearful, and the unbelieving, and the abominable, and the murderers, and immoral persons, the sorcerers, the adulterers, the liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." And you've all heard about the second death. How's that go? If you're born twice, you only die once. But if you're only born once, you're going to die twice. Now let me explain it. You're born physically, you need to be born spiritually. Just like Jesus told Nicodemus, you need to be born again. And Nicodemus was a teacher, and he said, "How do you do that? How do you be born again?" What Jesus was telling him is you have to become a new person. That's what baptism's about. Dying to our old self, being born a new creation in Jesus Christ. So if you're born twice, you're only going to die once physically. But if you're only born once and you never accept Jesus Christ, you're going to die twice. And this is the second death that he's talking about. Verse 9, it says, "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues." Now this angel, the last time John saw him was in chapter 16. So that was 1,000 and some years ago. Well, it wasn't really, because John's seeing this real quick. But in chronological order, the last time this guy done something in Revelation was over 1,000 years ago. But he says, one of these angels came, and he said, "Come here, I want to show you something, the bride and the wife of the Lamb." And in verse 10, it says, "He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain." I get the impression that everything John is seeing is kind of in the Spirit, but I don't know that. John seems to say, sometimes I feel like I'm really there, and he very well could be. God could be showing him this movie in real life. We have no idea. But he carried him away in the Spirit to a high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as a stone of crystal clear jasper. We're going to find out that the crystal clear jasper to John is like transparent gold in the next few verses, okay? So this city is like transparent gold. Do you know you can see through gold? Raise your hand if you did not know you could see through gold. You know why we didn't know that? Because we're not rich enough to have gold like that, all right? When I'm like, transparent gold? What are you talking about, transparent gold? The more pure it is, the more transparent it is, and the more flimsy it is. I mean, I watch people demonstrate this gold that is so pure that they couldn't even hold it up. It just kind of drooped. I mean, it was just so soft, and you could hold it up to the light, and the light shined right through it. It made a color. It wasn't pure. It made a color on the paper, but it says this crystal clear jasper is going to be like transparent gold or a diamond. Now, a diamond wouldn't be flimsy, but a diamond is transparent, right? So transparent like a diamond. Because sometimes what they called jewels back then aren't the same jewels we have today. You understand that? So most people think that this crystal clear jasper is going to be like a diamond. I should have left the gold part out till later. We're getting to that, okay? Verse 12. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and on its at the 12 gates are 12 angels, and the names were written on them. Why do we need gates to a city when there's not going to be any more evil around? Why do we need gates? Why do we need angels standing guard at the gates?
People are dying to get in.
People are dying to get in. It's too late. It's all over with. There's nobody else dying. All right? Again, I don't have the answer to that. But that's what God wants, okay? Gates, foundation stones. He doesn't even need a foundation stone. This thing can just float. And it may just float. It comes down from heaven, from the throne of God. It doesn't say it sits on this new earth. It could be floating above the earth for all we know. We're going to see the foundation stones. Kind of hard to grasp, isn't it? Some people say, I got an idea and I think this is the way it is. I'm glad. Maybe it is. But we can't nail it down because God doesn't tell us for sure in the Bible. It says, written on these 12 gates are 12 names, and the names are the tribes of the sons of Israel. So the 12 tribes of Israel are written on these gates. And I've covered this a lot, but do you know that there's a teaching out today that says the church took the place of Israel? That Israel is now inconsequence to God. They failed, they're out, the church is in. The church gets all the blessings, and that's not a biblical teaching. Israel is still God's chosen people, and even right here in the last 2 chapters of Revelation, it's going to be all about the Jewish people. The tribes' names are going to be on there. The apostles' names are going to be on the foundation. And were the apostles all Jewish? Yes, they were. They're all Jewish. So Israel is not counted off yet. It says, in fact, they never will be. It says there are 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west. So there's 3 tribes on the north, 3 tribes on the east, 3 tribes on the south, 3 tribes on the west. Does that ring a bell anywhere? Where do we see 3 tribes north, 3 tribes south, 3 tribes east? Where did we see that before? Say it again. Around the tabernacle. That's where they used to count. And I immediately said, what's the order? Where's the names? It didn't tell me. It doesn't tell me in Revelation where the names are. If it told me that Reuben, Gad, and then I'd say they're organized exactly the way God organized them back in Exodus when they were coming out of Egypt. When God said, you 3 tribes are here, you are here, you are here, and you are here. And when they were camped around the tabernacle in the wilderness, God picked the 3 biggest tribes to be on the west, the 3 smallest tribes are on the east, and the 2 that were in the middle are on the north and the south. Now, if you got tribes lined up on the west that are bigger than the ones on the east, does that not look like the plus sign's going to have a shorter and a longer arm? And then the one going north and south is the same length, so it looks like a cross pointed toward the east. When you looked at it from outer space, this camp looked just like the cross, even in the Old Testament. Isn't it amazing how God lines that stuff up? So wouldn't it be amazing if the gates on this new city of Jerusalem, if the tribes are in the same order? But it doesn't tell us that, so we don't know. It says the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them was written 12 names of the 12 apostles. Talked a little bit about whether it was Mattathias or Paul. And there's an argument both ways, who that 12th apostle is. But Peter said, when he stood up to preach, that he and the other 11, and this was after Judas had killed himself and they'd picked Mattathias, he and the other 11 apostles. So there's just as much, we can't say it's Paul or it's Mattathias. It's one of them. It probably Mattathias, but I'm not staking my eternal destiny on that, okay? But these 12 stones have the names of the apostles on them. There's also a debate over whether these 12 foundation stones look like 12 big blocks, and we're going to get in here to find out that this city is about 1,500 miles long, 1,500 miles wide, and 1,500 miles tall. It's a big cube. It's a big cube. Good thing you never watched Star Trek, The Borg. This would freak you out, all right? this cube has foundation stones. So does it have a foundation stone that's 1,500 miles square, 100 miles thick, and then another stone 1,500 miles square, 100 miles thick? Does it have 12 stones that are that big? Or does it have a 500 mile by 500 mile block, and then another 500 by 500 mile block, so that it's got 12 stones? How is it? Anybody know? Neither does anybody else. You can only guess, because we don't really know how it would be. Overwhelmingly, as I studied it, most people think it's going to be a layer. And I'm like, I don't know why you would think it's going to be a layer, because then you got to pick an apostle that's better to be the first one, where if they're all even, all the apostles are the same. But does that mean I'm right? Nope, because we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us what these foundation look like, but it does tell us that these stones, how special they are. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Verse 15, it says, the one who spoke with me had a golden measuring rod. Who's speaking with him? The angel, the one that helped pour out the 7 vials. So he had a golden measuring rod, and typically they're 10 feet in diameter, or 10 feet long, to measure the city and its gates and its wall. Anybody see something funny there? A golden measuring rod, 10 feet long. This thing's 1,500 miles. How long is that going to take? I'm just telling you, this angel must be quick. That's all I got to say. Okay, we're done. All right, so he measures it out. Verse 16, it says, the city is laid out as a square, and the length of the great is great, and the width, and he measured the city with the rod. 1,500 miles is its length, its width, and its height, and they are equal. Now, 1,500 miles is not original language, obviously. It's strata, or there's even another word that they use, 1,200, but they figured it's somewhere between 1,380 miles and 1,500. Okay, so if someone says it's 1,420 and you say, no, it's 1,500, don't get in a debate about it. It's in there somewhere, all right? And does it really matter? It doesn't matter. If we're talking somewhere around 1,400 to 1,500 miles, it's pretty big. I did hear someone talk about how big this thing's going to be, and they said there's been about 100 billion people live on the earth so far, total, even before the flood, 100 billion people. And if 20% accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, that's 20 billion. They said if 20 billion people are in this city, that means we're going to have 1/2 acre cubed for just us, one person. Cubed. You know how big a cubic half acre is? Several miles. Just for one person. So God isn't scrimping on the space. It's not going to be a tiny house episode, all right? There's a tiny house episode called Luxury Living in Tiny Spaces. This is going to be luxury living in a big space, okay? And someone says, how do you know there's only 20 billion? Well, the Bible talks a lot about how more people are headed down the wide road, few are headed down the narrow road. Over and over again, it says, many are going to destruction, few are going to find it. So we know it's going to be a small percentage, which is not good, but that's what we learn. He had a measuring rod. He measured its walls to be 72 yards, which is about 216 feet thick. So the walls around this cube are 216 feet thick. And this is where it comes back to that diamond I was talking to you about, because it says according to measurements, they talked about cubits originally. But in verse 18 it says, excuse me, supposed to be swallowing, not breathing. Hang on. The material of the wall was jasper. It's that same diamond material. And the city was pure gold like crystal glass, like clear glass. So it's crystal clear, 216 feet crystal clear. What happens when light goes through a diamond? It refracts. What happens when light goes through pure gold? We have no idea because we haven't seen it, all right? Go ahead.
We don't need the sun, moon, and stars for the glory of the Lord illuminates it. And all that stuff is happening, going through all those emeralds and everything else. Might be a big light show just about the sun.
All the different colors. We're going to get to that in just a second, but Dave's talking about all the different colors that are going to be represented and the light that's going through them. In fact, I had one guy said he took all these colors and he laid out what he thought it would look like to a gemologist. And he said, I want you to tell me what you think that would look like. And the guy said, I don't think a human eye will be able to comprehend or take it all in. It's going to be so beautiful. In fact, as we start to read all the different sapphires and emeralds, He said they're in perfect order to match and flow to make the beauty just as perfect as they could be if they're the same color that we think they are today. There's some that we're like, they may have called something different than we call it. Does that make sense? For instance, dinosaurs. They didn't call them dinosaurs in the Bible. They called them behemoths and leviathan. All right? They were different names. Well, they may call these gems different things back then than they are now. I'm going to cough again. There. Okay, we're at verse number 19. It says, the foundation stones of the city wall were adorned with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation stone was jasper, which is a clear. The second is sapphire. What color is sapphire? Blue. The third is chalcedony. And I got sky blue wrote down next to that one. The fourth is emerald, which is green. The fifth is sardonyx, which is red and white. I have. Anybody have something different?
This is onyx, and mine says onyx, and the other one's agate.
Okay, you got colors?
Onyx is like a bluish black, it's black.
It is.
Yeah.
See, you can tell even in the different translations that they're having trouble coming up with what emeralds these are. Okay? The sixth is sardis, which I got red. Ruby. The seventh is chrysolite. I got gold or clear. I actually spent time looking these up. Sometimes it was hard to find. Beryl. I have something wrote there, but I can't read it. The ninth is topaz, which is green-yellow. The 10th is chrysoprase. Turquoise, you have?
Yep.
I got green on that one. 11th is violet, the jacinth,
Mine says Jason.
violet color. And amethyst is purple. Does it make any difference what color they are? If this translation's right and Suzanne, no, it doesn't. The fact is, God's making these foundation stones, all these fabulous colors like Dave was talking about. And we're going to get over here. We're going to keep reading this. We're going to find out there's no sun, there's no moon anymore. We don't need them. Because the light of Jesus is just shining out. So they're going to be illuminated. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to be a mansion. Think about that. It's not going to be a grass hut when we get to this New Jerusalem. It's going to be a mansion. All right? Verse 21, it says, and the 12 gates were of 12 pearls. Each one of the gates was a single pearl. Now, either these are really small gates or these are very large pearls. All right? And pearls are very expensive. You can tell it does. Let me point something out right here. What is going to be the thing that's valued in this city? Can't be gold. We're using it for asphalt. It can't be diamonds. It's what we're wallpapering the place with. People. That's what's valued in this city. The things we value in this world are not the things that are going to be valued there. It's going to flip. The things that we think are right are going to be wrong. When we get there, we're going to realize people, people, people. That's what God values as people.
That's what he wants us to value here.
And that's what he wants us to value here. He loves us way more than anything else that he's created. He wants us to love him back. And so when this city comes down with all of its brilliance, he's going to show us all the things that you thought were worth a lot of money down there. They were costly down there. They're not costly up here. They're everywhere. We're putting them on bike paths for gravel, gems and diamonds. That's just what we're...
It's in the book of Revelation that some of us will be sitting on Jesus' throne with him. Wow. What a privilege.
Another thing, I thought I brought this up before, but let me point out how all these other gems God created through one way or another, pressure in the earth or something. But a pearl is created how? In an oyster. Why? Why did the oyster create a pearl? It had an irritant, and the irritant had to be covered, and it had to be covered, and it had to be covered, and it had to be covered. And I got to thinking about the children of Israel and God's people and how they had to be covered over and over again, how God had to cover them. And I thought it's amazing that he has their name on the gates, the pearly gates. That's where we get that phrase, the pearly gates. Their names are on there, but we're no different, are we? We've had to be covered, and we've had to be covered, and we've had to be covered. And so we're covered by his blood. But I thought it amazing that the pearly gates have the names of God's tribes on there. Single pearl, and it says, and the streets were as pure gold like transparent glass. Pure gold like transparent glass. Can you imagine the streets in the city not just going this way because it's a cube? The streets go this way and that way. They go both ways, up and down. We're living in a three-dimensional cube. In fact, it may be four-dimensional when we get there, and maybe have more dimensions than that. We don't know. But this is 1,500 miles tall by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles, and we get to live in the whole thing. We're not held down. We get to. It's going to be beyond what we can imagine. Okay, verse 22. It says, "Then I saw no temple in it." Why is there no temple? There's always a temple. There's a temple in the millennium. Say it again.
God dwells in it. He's the temple.
He is the temple. It tells us that. But what's the temple used for? Two things.
Worship.
To meet with God. What's the other thing? Sacrifices for what? Sin. Not going to be any of that anymore. Don't need a temple. God's there. We're already meeting with him. He's with us. And there's not going to be any sin. So we don't need a temple. So there's no temple. It says, for the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. Verse 23, it says, and the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. So Jesus is the one illuminating this whole thing. And I put Isaiah chapter 60. That's when I got them mixed up. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 3, it says, the nations will come. That's not the one I'm looking for. Verse number 19 in Isaiah chapter 60 says, no longer will you have the sun for the light of day, nor for the brightness will the moon give off its light, but you will have the Lord for the everlasting light, and your God for your glory. Your sun will no longer set, nor will your moon wane, for you will have the Lord for an everlasting light, and the days of your mourning will be over. This is 700 years before Jesus that Isaiah is talking about this new Jerusalem. This new heaven that's coming down from the throne of God.
And it happened at creation too. Before he made the sun and the moon and the stars, he was the light.
For the first 4 days, yes.
Thinking it started with let there be light and it ended with let there be light.
Think about that. That is good. I like that. So during creation, there was no sun or moon till the fourth day. When people come to me and say, those days could have been millions of years, I say, well, then for millions of years, there was no sun and no moon. That means there was no tide. There was no weather. Plants couldn't grow. So how did that work? Okay? They always say, we don't know that. You can go to Romans chapter 5, verse 12, and get rid of that evolutionary theory because it says there was no death or decay before Adam sinned. So if there was no death or decay before Adam sinned, then everything must have lived for billions of years and not died. Well, if everything lived and didn't die, there could be no evolution at all. Does that make sense? So that theory is out the window. All right, how did we get off on that? All right, where were we? 24. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. There are going to be people set up in charge of different areas in the earth. I can see right there, there's going to be kings. God's going to say, you're taking care of that, you're taking care of that, you're taking care of that. Remember the rewards that the Bible talks about? People are going to be given things to do. And there are going to be people in charge, and they're going to make sure that they're doing what they want to do, but it's what they're supposed to do. And so they're going to be bringing glory into this city for God. Verse 25, in the daytime, for there's not going to be a nighttime, remember, it's always day, the gates will never be closed. So the gates are never going to close. These gates are fake. Anybody got shutters on your house that don't work? They're just screwed on the wall? That's probably the way these gates are, all right? They're just pearly gates, and they're just openings because they're never going to be shut. They don't need to be shut. It says they will bring the glory and honor to the nations into it. And again, here's a warning that God gives John. He said, I want you to pass this on to everybody that's going to be reading these letters to the churches and this book. It says, nothing unclean, no one who practices abominations and lying shall ever enter into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. There's another warning that God gives. There's only one way to be able to see and get into this thing that John is writing about, and that is to accept Jesus Christ. Have your name written in the Lamb's book of life. Why does God have to make a brand new heaven and a brand new earth? And this is going to be the greatest argument for a new third heaven where God is. Why would he have to create new heaven and new earth? Read that verse again. Nothing unclean and no one who practices abomination will ever come into it. Remember when in the book of Job, God was looking at the angels and he said, what are you doing here? So has there ever been anything unclean? He says nothing unclean could come into God's presence, so I'm not sure how all that fits. But maybe God's making it all brand new because he says, you know what? It's been defiled. I want a new one. It's kind of like buying a house or getting a car that's got somebody else's stuff on it. You know what I'm saying? I want it detailed. I want it clean. Only God says, we're not cleaning it. We're making a whole brand new one. We're going to burn up the old one and we're getting a whole brand new one. And so God says, it's going to be brand new. Nothing unclean, no abomination, lying is ever going to come into it. Only those who have their name written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Go ahead.
I'm told, and correct me if I'm wrong, Isaiah 11, there'll be kids, babies playing around in asphalt,
Yeah.
sinkholes. I've heard that that is because some saved people will come into the millennium in human bodies. Is that right? I mean,
Yes.
they'll have kids.
Yes.
Kids who-
Yes. We're talking about the millennium now. What Dave's talking about is the 1,000-year reign, not this.
Oh. I thought the 1,000 years is millennium, same thing.
No, 1,000 years of millennium is the same thing, but this is after the millennium is over. This is new heaven, new earth. All right, this is actually heaven, as what we would think of as heaven. The old earth, the earth that we were on during the millennium in the 1,000 years, where the kids were playing with the cobras and the lions were laying down with the lambs, that earth is gone. For 1,000 years it existed, now it's gone. In fact, at the beginning of the white throne judgment in chapter 20, we learned that it burned up and blew away in the presence of God. We just talked about why would it burn up and blow away in the presence of God? Because God is holy. Why can't we go to heaven if we have sin? Because we're just going to get burned up and blown away. That's why. We have to be righteous. We have to have Jesus covering our unrighteousness, or we're going to be burned up and blown away. Any other questions? Thanks for being here. Dave, I get to ask you to pray if you would. Thanks.
Father God, and I thank you for Brother Gary, I love his passion for the Word of God. He studies 20 hours a week for each Wednesday night message. Thank you for us, the faithful, and become faithful. Please give us extra grace, extra mercy, extra love to be leaning into this thing and not away from it. Please save our family members and our friends. Please comfort the people that are affirmed, and just ask for your glory and your honor to be done. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for coming. Hope you have a great week.